The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the road, and Clara Winslow gripped the worn leather seat until her knuckles turned white. Outside the dusty window, the Montana Territory stretched endless and unforgiving, nothing but golden prairie grass swaying under a merciless August sun. She had never felt so far from home. She had never felt so terrified. In her lap, she clutched a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, letters that weren't hers. Letters addressed to Miss Rosalind Winslow, the beautiful one, the golden daughter, the sister who should have been sitting in this seat. But Rosalind wasn't here. Rosalind was back in Boston, probably laughing at some gentleman's joke in their mother's parlor, her golden curls bouncing, her perfect rosebud lips curved into the smile that had captured every eligible bachelor's heart within 3 counties. Clara pressed her palm against her stomach, trying to calm the nausea that had nothing to do with the rocking stagecoach. 3 weeks ago, she had been invisible. The plain sister, the quiet one who kept the household accounts and mended the linens and never complained when Rosalind received all the attention, all the suitors, all the hope for their family's dwindling fortunes. 3 weeks ago, her mother had made a deal with the devil himself. No, not the devil. A rancher. A wealthy rancher in Montana Territory who had written to a matrimonial agency seeking a bride. A man named Samuel Hartley who owned 2,000 acres of prime cattle land and a house with 8 rooms and needed a wife to make it a home. Mother had sent Rosalind's photograph. Mother had written letters in Rosalind's name, describing her many accomplishments, her gentle nature, her eagerness to become a frontier wife. Mother had accepted the train ticket and the generous allowance for travel expenses. And then, 3 days before the departure, Rosalind had announced she was engaged to William Pierce, the banker's son, and she would rather die than marry some dusty cowboy in the middle of nowhere. Clara could still hear her mother's voice, sharp as broken glass. You will go in her place. You will pretend to be Rosalind until the marriage is legal. By then, it will be too late for him to do anything about it. You owe this family, Clara. You owe me. The stagecoach hit another bump, and Clara's stomach rolled. What had she done? What was she doing? She was about to deceive a man into marrying her. A man who expected beauty and grace and charm, and would instead receive plain, practical Clara with her mousy brown hair, and her unremarkable grey eyes, and her figure that could generously be described as sturdy. She thought about the photograph tucked into the letters. Rosalind in her finest gown, her hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her expression soft and demure. Samuel Hartley was expecting that woman. Samuel Hartley was going to receive Clara. She could still turn back. She could get off at the next station, sell the return ticket, find work somewhere. She didn't have to do this, but then she remembered her mother's face when the bank had come to discuss the mortgage. She remembered her father's grave, barely 3 years old, and the mountain of debts he had left behind. She remembered her younger brother Thomas, only 12, who deserved a chance at an education, at a future. Rosalind's wedding to William Pierce would bring some relief, but not enough. The matrimonial arrangement had been their salvation, their one desperate hope. And now that hope rested entirely on Clara's shoulders. The stagecoach driver called out something she couldn't quite hear, and one of the other passengers, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, leaned toward her. "Elk Creek Station coming up, miss. That's your stop, ain't it?" Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. Through the window, she could see a small cluster of buildings emerging from the endless prairie. A general store, a blacksmith, a sad little church with a crooked steeple. And standing in front of what appeared to be the station house, a lone figure, a man. Even from this distance she could tell he was tall, impossibly tall, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, wearing a dark hat that shadowed his face. He stood perfectly still, watching the approaching stagecoach with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to waiting. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. That had to be him. Samuel Hartley, her intended, the man she was about to deceive. "God forgive me," she whispered under her breath. The stagecoach groaned to a stop, and the driver jumped down to open the door. Clara gathered her small valise and the precious letters, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped both. The grizzled man offered her a hand down, and she took it gratefully, stepping into the blazing Montana sun. For a moment, she couldn't see anything. The light was blinding after the dim interior of the coach. She blinked, raising one hand to shield her eyes. And then she saw him. Samuel Hartley was not what she had expected. The letters had described him as a practical man, a widower of 32 years, seeking a sensible wife to help manage his household. She had imagined someone weathered and worn, perhaps portly from prosperity, certainly ordinary. He was none of those things. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, cheekbones that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were blue, not the pale, watery blue of Boston socialites, but deep and vivid, like the heart of a flame. They swept over her once, twice, and something flickered in their depths. Something that looked like confusion. "Miss Winslow?" His voice was low and rough, like distant thunder rolling across the prairie. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. She nodded instead, clutching her valise to her chest like a shield. He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He towered over her by at least a foot, maybe more. Up close, she could see a thin scar running through his left eyebrow, and another along the edge of his jaw. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, were massive, the knuckles scarred and calloused. "I'm Samuel Hartley." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair cropped short, threaded with early silver at the temples. "Welcome to Montana." Clara swallowed hard. "Thank you. She caught herself just in time. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you, Mr. Hartley. Your letters they were very kind." His eyes narrowed slightly, and for a terrible moment she thought he knew. She thought he could see straight through her deception to the truth beneath. But then he nodded once, short and sharp. "You must be tired from your journey. I have a wagon. We can talk on the way to the ranch." He reached for her valise, and when his fingers brushed against hers, Clara felt a jolt of something she couldn't name. Heat. Electricity. Fear. She released the bag quickly, stepping back. "That's very considerate of you, Mr. Hartley." "Sam," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should call me Sam." Married. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. "Then you must call me." She hesitated, the lie sticking in her throat. "Rose. You must call me Rose." The name felt wrong in her mouth, foreign and false, but Sam just nodded, something unreadable passing across his face. "Rose," he repeated, as if testing the name. "All right then, Rose, let's get you home." Home. She followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to two massive draft horses, letting him help her up onto the seat. His hand engulfed hers completely, rough and warm, and he lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. As the wagon rolled out of town and onto the open prairie, Clara stared at the man beside her and wondered if she had just made the worst mistake of her life. They drove in silence for nearly an hour. Clara was grateful for the quiet, using the time to study the landscape and compose herself. The prairie was beautiful in its stark way. Endless waves of golden grass, broken only by occasional clusters of cottonwood trees and the distant purple shadows of mountains. Sam handled the horses with easy competence, his large hands gentle on the reins. Every now and then, she caught him glancing at her from the corner of his eye, that same confused expression flickering across his features. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Clara cleared her throat. "Your land is beautiful, Mr. Sam How long have you lived here? 12 years. He didn't look at her. Came out from Virginia after the war. Bought my first 100 acres with my army pay. Built the ranch from nothing. That must have taken tremendous hard work. He shrugged, the movement rippling through his massive shoulders. Work is all I know. The war. That explained the scars, perhaps. The hardness in his eyes. Clara thought of the letters again, the careful, almost formal language he had used. He had written about his land, his cattle, his need for a wife to make his house a home. He had not written about himself. Not really. Your letters mentioned you were widowed, she ventured carefully. I'm sorry for your loss. Sam's jaw tightened. That was 8 years ago. Sarah. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. The raw pain in his voice made Clara's chest ache. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have... No. His voice was flat. You should know. I'm not good at this. Talking, feelings. He gestured vaguely. All of it. Sarah used to say I was about as emotional as a fence post. Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. And yet you wrote to a matrimonial agency seeking a wife. He was silent for a long moment, then quietly, a man gets tired of being alone. The words struck something deep inside her. She understood loneliness. She had lived with it her entire life, invisible in her own home, overlooked and undervalued. She had never expected to marry at all. Plain girls with no dowry didn't receive proposals. Until now. Until this deception had given her something she never thought she would have. The ranch appeared on the horizon like something from a dream. A large wooden house with a wraparound porch, painted white with green shutters. A massive red barn, corrals filled with horses. Outbuildings scattered across the property, and beyond it all, thousands of acres of grazing land dotted with cattle. Clara's breath caught. It's magnificent. Sam made a gruff sound. It's home. He guided the wagon up the long drive, past a vegetable garden and a small orchard of apple trees. This is the main house. There's a bunkhouse for the hands beyond the barn. I've got 8 men working for me, plus a cook. His name is Ezra. He's been with me since the beginning. As if summoned, the front door opened and a wiry older man emerged. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in a neat braid and skin weathered to the color of old leather. His eyes, dark and sharp, fixed on Clara with undisguised curiosity. This her? His voice was rough but not unkind. Sam climbed down from the wagon and came around to help Clara descend. Ezra, this is Miss Rose Winslow. Rose, this is Ezra Crow Feather. He keeps this place running. Clara offered her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Crow Feather. Ezra's eyebrows rose. He shook her hand briefly, his grip surprisingly gentle. Just Ezra, miss. He turned to Sam. I've got her room ready. Left the blue quilt on the bed like you asked. Something flickered in Sam's expression, almost like embarrassment. Thank you, Ezra, that'll be all. Ezra nodded, but his sharp eyes lingered on Clara for a moment longer. Something knowing passed across his weathered face. Then he turned and disappeared back into the house. Sam cleared his throat. I'll show you to your room. We can... He hesitated. We can talk about arrangements after you've rested. Arrangements. Clara's stomach knotted. The wedding, he meant. The marriage. The life they would share. The lies she would have to maintain. She followed him into the house, and despite everything, she couldn't help but gasp. The interior was simple, but beautiful. Polished wooden floors, a massive stone fireplace, comfortable furniture arranged around a colorful woven rug, large windows let in floods of golden afternoon light. It looked like a home, a real home, warm and welcoming, and nothing like the cold formality of the house in Boston. Sam watched her reaction, something almost vulnerable in his expression. Sarah decorated it. Before he stopped, swallowed. I haven't changed much since then." "It's lovely," Clara said softly. "She really had wonderful taste." He nodded once, then led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms, he explained, his at the end of the hall, a guest room, and hers. He pushed open a door to reveal a bright, cheerful room with pale yellow walls and a large bed covered in the blue quilt Ezra had mentioned. A washstand stood in one corner, a small writing desk in another. Fresh wildflowers sat in a glass jar on the windowsill. "I'll let you rest," Sam said, setting her valise on the bed. "Supper's at 6 if you need anything." He trailed off awkwardly. "Just ask." He turned to leave, and Clara heard herself speak. "Sam." He stopped, looked back at her. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for the ticket, the letters, the—" She gestured at the room. "All of this. It's more than I expected." Something shifted in his blue eyes. More warmth, perhaps. Less suspicion. "You're welcome, Rose." The name was a knife in her heart. She forced herself to smile until he closed the door behind him. Then she sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. What had she done? This man was kind. This man had prepared flowers for her arrival and asked for a special quilt to be put on her bed. This man had lost his wife and his child and had spent 8 years alone, working his land, building his empire, and finally gathering the courage to seek companionship again. And she was going to break his heart. The first week passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Sam was a man of routine, rising before dawn to work the ranch and returning after dark, exhausted but always willing to sit with Clara on the porch and talk. They discussed everything and nothing: the weather, the cattle, the approaching autumn. The book she was reading from his surprisingly extensive library. He never touched her, never stood too close, never made her feel anything but safe, which somehow made everything worse. Clara found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking. The way he moved, powerful but controlled. The way he spoke to his men, firm but fair. The way his face softened when he looked at her, like she was something precious he couldn't quite believe was real. "He thinks I'm Rosalind," she reminded herself constantly. "He thinks I'm beautiful and accomplished and everything I'm not." But as the days passed, a terrible thought began to take root in her mind. What if it didn't matter? What if she could be the wife he needed, even if she wasn't the woman he expected? What if she could make him happy and he never had to know the truth? The thought was seductive, dangerous, completely wrong, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. On the 8th day, Sam came to her after breakfast with an unusual expression on his face. Part determination, part nervousness. He was holding his hat in his hands, turning it over and over. "Rose," he said, "I know we agreed to wait, to take time to know each other before—" He cleared his throat. "But the preacher is coming through Elk Creek next week. He won't be back until spring." Clara's heart stopped. "You want to get married next week?" "Only if you're willing." His blue eyes searched her face. "I know it's faster than we discussed, but I'm not a young man anymore, and winter comes hard in Montana. I'd rest easier knowing you were—" His jaw tightened. "Knowing you were mine, legally, properly." The possessive words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She should say no. She should tell him the truth. She should— Yes. The word escaped before she could stop it. Sam's eyes widened. "Yes?" "Yes," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll marry you next week." The smile that transformed his face was like watching the sun rise. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look at him, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. "You won't regret this, Rose. I swear to you, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret this." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The touch burned through her like fire. Then he was gone, striding out of the house to share the news with his men, and Clara was left standing alone in the kitchen, trembling. 1 week. She had 1 week to decide whether to destroy this man's trust forever or bury her lies so deep they would never see the light of day. God help her. She didn't know which choice was worse. The days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Ezra took charge of the preparations with surprising enthusiasm, transforming the ranch house with fresh flowers and borrowed china. The hands pitched in to build a wooden arch for the ceremony, decorated with late summer roses from the garden. Clara watched it all with growing dread. She had tried to tell him. Twice she had started to confess, the words burning on her tongue. Both times something had stopped her, the look in his eyes, the gentle way he took her hand, the knowledge that her confession would shatter everything. She was a coward. She knew that now. 2 days before the wedding, she was sitting on the porch, pretending to read, when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was approaching fast, dust billowing behind his horse. Sam emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. The rider was a young man, perhaps 20, with a telegram clutched in his hand. He pulled up in front of the house and thrust the paper towards Sam. "Message from Boston, sir. Marked urgent." Clara's blood turned to ice. Sam took the telegram, frowning. He unfolded it, and she watched his expression change. Confusion first, then understanding. Then something terrible, something cold and hard that transformed his face into a stranger's. He looked at her. "Rose," he said, and his voice was like the edge of a knife. Or should I say Clara? The world tilted. Clara stood up, the book falling from her nerveless fingers. "Sam, I can explain." "Explain?" He crossed the porch in 2 long strides, stopping inches from her. His massive frame blocked out the sun, his blue eyes blazing with fury. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 weeks. Explain how you're not even the woman I agreed to marry." She could see the telegram now, crushed in his fist. The words were too small to read, but she didn't need to. She knew what it said. Rosalind had written. Rosalind had confessed everything. "Please," Clara whispered, "just let me explain. Your sister's letter explains plenty." His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "She says you took her place because she refused to come. She says your mother orchestrated the whole deception. She says you're nothing but a plain, desperate spinster who was willing to trick a stranger into marriage." Each word was a blow. Clara flinched, tears streaming down her face. "It's true, all of it. But Sam, I never meant to what? Deceive me? Make a fool of me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I should have known. I should have known the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. You looked nothing like the photograph. Nothing. I know. I know I'm not beautiful like her. I know I'm not. This isn't about beauty." His voice cracked. "This is about trust. I trusted you. I opened my home to you, my life. I told you things I've never told anyone. And the whole time, you were lying to my face." Clara reached for him, but he stepped back as if her touch would burn him. "Sam, please. I was wrong. I was so wrong. But somewhere along the way I started to—" She choked on the words. "I started to care about you. Truly care about you. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but caring about someone means being honest with them." His eyes were flat, dead. "Get your things. I'm taking you back to town." "What? The wedding is off. I'll arrange for your passage back to Boston." He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "I want you gone within the hour." He strode off toward the barn, and Clara watched him go through a blur of tears. Around her, the wedding preparations mocked her. The flowers, the arch, the borrowed china, all of it for nothing. She stood there for a long moment, frozen, unable to move. The telegram lay crumpled on the porch where Sam had dropped it, and Clara picked it up with trembling hands. The words swam before her eyes. "Urgent stop, Sister Clara. Traveling in my place. Stop, did not consent to arrangement. Stop, mother forced deception. Stop, real. Rosalind, engaged to William Pierce. Stop, please forgive me for my family's dishonesty. Stop, Rosalind Winslow. Rosalind. Her beautiful, selfish sister, who couldn't even let Clara have this one chance at happiness without destroying it from afar. Had she felt guilty? Or had she simply wanted to protect her own reputation, worried that the scandal might reach Boston and taint her perfect engagement? It didn't matter. The damage was done. Clara looked out at the prairie, at the land she had come to love, at the life she had dared to imagine for herself. In a few short weeks, this place had become more of a home than Boston had ever been. These people, gruff Ezra and the shy ranch hands and stoic, beautiful Sam, had become more of a family than her own blood. And now, it was over. She folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Then she went inside to pack. The ride to Elk Creek was the longest hour of Clara's life. Sam didn't speak, didn't look at her. He sat ramrod straight on the wagon seat, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. Clara clutched her valise in her lap and tried to find words. Any words. But everything she thought of sounded hollow, inadequate. I'm sorry seemed too small. I love you seemed too impossible. So she said nothing at all. When they reached the station, Sam pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down. He came around to help her, his movements stiff and mechanical. When his hand closed around hers, she felt him hesitate, just for a moment, just long enough for hope to flicker in her chest. Then he released her and stepped back. There's a train east tomorrow morning, he said, his voice flat. I've arranged for a room at the boarding house. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. This should cover your passage home. Clara stared at the envelope. I don't want your money. Take it. His jaw tightened. Consider it payment for the trouble my anger is about to cause your family. What do you mean? I mean I'm writing to your mother. He met her eyes, and the cold fury there made her flinch. I'm going to make sure everyone in Boston knows what she tried to do. Every society matron, every potential suitor for your precious sister. Everyone. Clara's heart sank. Sam, please. Rosalind didn't know. She wasn't part of... She knew enough to write and expose you. His lip curled. Don't waste your breath defending her. He turned away, climbing back onto the wagon. Clara watched him go, and something broke inside her. Some final hope she hadn't even known she was holding. Sam, she called out. Wait! He paused, not looking back. For what it's worth, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I never lied about who I am. Only about my name. Everything else, every conversation we had, every moment we shared. That was real. I was real. He was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, that almost makes it worse. The wagon rolled away, and Clara stood in the dusty street, watching until it disappeared over the horizon. She stayed there for a long time, even after the wagon was gone, even after the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. The people of Elk Creek went about their business around her, casting curious glances at the young woman standing motionless in the middle of the street. But no one approached her. Finally, as the evening shadows began to stretch across the town, Clara made her way to the boarding house. The room Mrs. Patterson showed her was small and spare, nothing like the cheerful yellow bedroom at the ranch. Clara sat on the narrow bed and stared at the wall, feeling hollow, empty, like everything vital had been scooped out of her and left behind on Sam's porch. She should go home. She should take the money Sam had given her, buy a ticket, and return to Boston in disgrace. Face her mother's fury, endure Rosalind's pity, accept that she had gambled and lost, but every time she thought about leaving, something in her chest rebelled. This isn't over, a voice whispered in her mind. It sounded strangely like her father. He had died when she was 22, but she still remembered his voice, warm and steady. He had been the only one in the family who had truly seen her. Fight for what you want, Clara, he used to say. The world won't hand it to you. She had never fought for anything in her life. She had accepted her place in the shadows, accepted that she was less than Rosalind, less than worthy, less than enough. She had let her mother and sister dictate her fate without protest. But that woman, the meek Clara who accepted crumbs from life's table, felt very far away now. Montana had changed her. Sam had changed her. Or maybe they had simply shown her who she had always been, underneath the layers of resignation and self-doubt. Clara lay down on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Clara didn't take the train the next morning. She told herself it was because she was too tired, too heartbroken, too devastated to face the long journey home. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't ready to give up. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who asked no questions and demanded nothing but payment in advance. Clara paid for a week and locked herself in her tiny room, trying to think. She had made a terrible mistake. She had deceived a good man, betrayed his trust, and broken something that might never be repaired. She deserved his anger. She deserved to be sent away. But she also knew something else, something she hadn't been able to say when he was standing in front of her, his eyes full of fury and pain. She loved him, not the wealthy rancher with 2,000 acres, not the arrangement that would save her family. Him, Samuel Hartley, the quiet man who spoke to horses in gentle murmurs, the grieving widower who kept his late wife's decorations because he couldn't bear to change them. The lonely soul who had reached out across 1,000 miles, hoping to find someone who would understand him. She loved him, and she had ruined everything. 3 days passed. Clara barely ate, barely slept. She spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the prairie, wondering what Sam was doing. Was he angry? Relieved? Had he already written to Boston to destroy her family's reputation? Did he ever think about her at all? On the 4th day, a knock at her door made her jump. Miss Winslow. Mrs. Patterson's voice was gruff. "You have a visitor." Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She smoothed her hair with trembling hands and opened the door. It wasn't Sam. Ezra Crow Feather stood in the hallway, his weathered face unreadable. He was holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mr. Crow Feather." Clara blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Ezra tilted his head, studying her with those sharp, dark eyes. "Came to see if you were still alive. Boss wouldn't ask, but I know he's wondering. He's wondering about me? Man hasn't slept in 4 days. Ezra shrugged. "Barely eats. Bites the head off anyone who talks to him. Something's eating at him, and it ain't just the work." Clara's chest tightened. "He made it very clear he wants nothing to do with me." "Did he now?" Ezra's lips twitched. "Funny. That's not how I remember it." He thrust the bundle toward her. Clara took it, confused. "What is this? Something you left behind?" Ezra turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, miss, I knew you weren't that girl in the picture the moment you stepped off the stage." Clara's eyes widened. "You knew?" "Pretty easy to see." Ezra's expression softened, "But I also saw the way you looked at Sam, the way he looked at you. That wasn't fake. I never meant to hurt him. I believe you." Ezra started down the hallway. "Question is, does he believe you?" After he left, Clara unwrapped the bundle with shaking hands. Inside was a book. The book she had been reading on the porch the day everything fell apart. A collection of poetry by Tennyson. There was a folded paper tucked inside the cover. Clara opened it and her heart stopped. It was one of her letters, the ones she had written to Sam before coming to Montana, pretending to be Rosalind. But someone had marked it up, underlined certain passages. "I confess I am nervous about meeting you. I fear I am not the kind of woman you imagine. Sometimes I feel invisible, even in my own home. I dream of open spaces, a place where I might finally become the person I was meant to be. At the bottom of the page, in strong, slanted handwriting, a single note. These words weren't Rosalind's. They were yours, weren't they? Clara clutched the letter to her chest and began to cry. She found him at sunset. The ride out to the ranch had taken nearly 2 hours, her rented horse plodding along the familiar road. Clara had borrowed clothes from Mrs. Patterson, a simple riding habit that was slightly too large, and pulled her hair back in a practical braid. She looked nothing like the fine lady who had arrived in Montana 3 weeks ago. She looked like herself. Sam was sitting on the porch when she rode up, as if he had been waiting for her. His face was haggard, his eyes shadowed, his jaw covered in several days of stubble. He looked like a man who had been fighting a battle. Maybe he had. Clara dismounted and tied her horse to the post. She walked up the porch steps slowly, giving him time to tell her to leave. He didn't. "You got my message," he said quietly. Clara held up the marked letter. "You went through all of them, every word." His blue eyes met hers. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about what you said, that you never lied about who you are." "I didn't." Clara's voice was steady. "Rosalind never wrote a single one of those letters. I did. Mother would dictate what she wanted said, but the actual words, those were mine. Everyone." Sam was silent for a long moment. Then, "Tell me about the photograph." Clara's heart sank. "It was Rosalind," Mother insisted. "She said no man would agree to marry me if he saw what I really looked like." Something flickered in Sam's expression. Anger, but not at her. "That woman sounds like a piece of work. She's desperate." Clara sighed. "We all were. My father died 3 years ago and left us with nothing but debts. Mother has been scrambling ever since, trying to secure good matches for her daughters, trying to keep us from losing everything." She shook her head. "I'm not excusing what she did, what I did, but I need you to understand why." Sam stood up, and for the first time Clara saw how tired he was, how broken. He moved to the porch railing, staring out at the sunset-painted prairie. "I've been thinking about Sarah," he said quietly. "My wife." Clara remained silent, waiting. "When I wrote to that matrimonial agency, I wasn't looking for love." He laughed, bitter and short. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore. I just wanted—" He stopped, struggling. "I wanted someone to share the silence with. Someone who wouldn't mind that I'm not good at talking or feelings or any of that. Someone who could make this house feel like a home again. And you thought Rosalind could be that person. I thought her letters could be." He turned to face her. "Those words you wrote, they reached something inside me. Something I'd buried so deep, I forgot it existed." He shook his head. "That's why I was so angry when I found out the truth. Not because you weren't beautiful, because I felt like I'd been given something precious and then had it ripped away." Clara's breath caught. "Sam, let me finish." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "I spent 4 days trying to convince myself I hated you, trying to tell myself I'd been a fool, that you were just a liar and a schemer, and I was well rid of you. And I couldn't do it." His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face, not Rosalind's, yours. I heard your laugh, your voice. I remembered the way you looked at my land like it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. I remembered the way you talked to Ezra and played with the barn cats and stayed up late reading by candlelight because you couldn't put the book down." Clara was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sam." He reached out and cupped her face in his massive hands, so gentle despite their size, so impossibly tender. "I don't know who Rosalind is," he said. "I never met her, never wanted to. But I know who you are, Clara Winslow. I know you're brave enough to travel 1,000 miles into the unknown, strong enough to try to save your family, even at the cost of your own happiness, honest enough to feel guilty every single day for a lie that wasn't even your idea. He leaned down, his forehead touching hers. "I know you, Clara, the real you, and I think," he swallowed hard, "I think I might be falling in love with you." Clara's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a single breath. She reached up, her small hands covering his. "I love you," she whispered. "Not the arrangement, not the ranch. You. I think I started falling the moment you helped me down from that stagecoach. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." Sam pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Even knowing I'm difficult, that I work too hard and talk too little and have enough emotional scars to fill a cemetery." A laugh escaped her, watery but real. Even knowing all of that. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. Clara rose on her tiptoes, her hands fisting in his shirt, and Sam's arms came around her, lifting her off the ground entirely, crushing her against his chest like he was afraid she might disappear. His lips were warm and demanding, his stubble rough against her skin. Clara felt herself dissolving, melting, becoming something new in his arms. Every wall she had ever built came crashing down. Every fear she had ever harbored burned away in the heat of his embrace. This was what she had been waiting for. This was what she had traveled 1,000 miles to find. Not a wealthy rancher, or a comfortable home, or an escape from her family's debts. This, him. This feeling of being wholly, completely, irrevocably wanted. Sam broke the kiss to press his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. His hands were shaking where they gripped her waist. "God, Clara," he whispered, "I thought I'd lost you these past 4 days." His voice cracked. "I've never felt so alone. I'm here." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. I promise." He kissed her again, softer this time, slower. A promise and a prayer and a beginning all rolled into one. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Clara was laughing and crying at the same time. "Does this mean the wedding is back on?" she managed. Sam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "It means we've got a lot of talking to do, a lot of truth-telling. No more secrets, Clara, not ever, no more secrets," she agreed. "I promise." He set her down gently, keeping one arm around her waist, as if he couldn't bear to let her go. "There's something you should know, though." "What?" His expression turned serious. "I'm still writing to your mother, but not to ruin her reputation." Clara frowned. "Then why?" "Because she needs to know that her daughter is marrying me." His blue eyes sparkled. "And that if she ever tries to manipulate or hurt you again, she'll have a very large, very protective rancher to answer to." Clara buried her face in his chest, laughing. "She's going to hate you. Probably." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I can live with that." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the Montana sky. And for the first time in her life, Clara Winslow felt exactly where she belonged. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning when the prairie grass had turned to gold, and the mountains wore their first caps of snow. Clara woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, the same bed she had slept in that first night at the ranch, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The lies, the truth, the forgiveness that had felt like a miracle. Today, she would become Sam's wife. For real this time, no deception. No false names, just Clara, plain and ordinary and somehow impossibly loved. Mrs. Patterson arrived at sunrise with the wedding dress, a simple white cotton gown that she had helped Clara alter over the past 2 weeks. It was nothing like the fancy Boston gowns Clara had grown up seeing at society weddings. No silk, no lace imported from Paris, no train or veil or elaborate decorations. It was perfect. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said as she fastened the last button. Clara stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her brown hair, freshly washed and dried, had been braided with wildflowers from the garden. Her grey eyes, usually so unremarkable, seemed to glow with happiness. Her cheeks were flushed with anticipation. For the first time in her life, Clara Winslow looked at her reflection and saw something beautiful. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Clara smiled. "I've been ready my whole life." The ceremony was small. Just Ezra and the ranch hands, Mrs. Patterson, and the circuit preacher, who had finally returned from his rounds. They stood beneath the wooden arch the men had built, now decorated with autumn leaves and the last roses of the season. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Sam shot a warning look at the assembled crowd that made everyone laugh. When he asked if Sam would take Clara as his wife, Sam's voice rang out clear and strong. "I will." And when he asked if Clara would take Sam as her husband, she looked up at this giant of a man with his scarred hands and wounded heart, and felt her soul settle into place. "I will," she said, "forever." Sam kissed her before the preacher finished speaking, earning cheers and wolf whistles from the ranch hands. Clara laughed against his lips, happier than she had ever been. That night, after the celebration had wound down and the last guest had stumbled home, Sam carried her across the threshold of their home. Their home. The word made Clara's heart sing. He set her down in the main room, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. The firelight played across Sam's face, softening the hard angles, making him look almost vulnerable. "I have something for you," he said. "Sam, you've already given me so much." He shook his head, disappearing into his study and returning with a small wooden box. This was Sarah's. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket on a thin chain. "I couldn't." He stopped, swallowed. "I couldn't give it to you before." It felt like betraying her memory, but now. He unfastened the locket and showed her the inside. It was empty. "I want you to put something in it," he said. "Something that matters to you. A lock of hair, a photograph, whatever you want. And then I want you to wear it." He met her eyes, not as a replacement for Sarah, but as a symbol of us, our life together, our future. Clara took the locket with trembling hands. She thought for a moment, then reached up and carefully extracted a single hair from her simple braid. She coiled it inside the locket and closed it with a soft click. "There," she whispered. "Now a part of me will always be close to your heart." Sam fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "You already are," he said. "You always will be." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. Clara melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle in his hair. "We should probably—" She gasped as his lips traced down her throat. "Discuss sleeping arrangements." Sam pulled back, his blue eyes dark with wanting. "You're my wife now?" He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "That means you sleep beside me, in my bed, every night for the rest of our lives." The possessive words sent heat flooding through her. Clara smiled, reaching up to trace the scar along his jaw. Then, "Take me to bed, husband." He did. Clara woke the next morning to golden sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, and the solid warmth of Sam's body curved around hers. For a moment she lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement would shatter the dream. But it wasn't a dream. The weight of his arm across her waist was real. The steady rhythm of his breathing against her hair was real. The gold band on her finger, catching the morning light, was real. She was married. She was his wife. She was home. Sam stirred behind her, his arm tightening. Morning. His voice was rough with sleep, deeper even than usual. Clara felt it rumble through her entire body. "Good morning," she whispered back. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder, her neck, the sensitive spot behind her ear. Clara shivered. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about the question. about the night they had shared, tender and passionate and everything she had never dared to dream, about the way he had held her afterward, like she was something precious, murmuring words of love against her skin until she fell asleep in his arms. "Perfect," she said. "I feel perfect." Sam's low laugh vibrated through her. "Good, because I intend to make you feel this way every morning for the rest of our lives. That's quite a promise." He turned her in his arms, his blue eyes soft in the morning light. "I'm a man of my word, Clara Hartley." Her new name sent a thrill through her. Clara Hartley. It fit. It felt right, like she had been waiting her whole life to become this person, and she was finally here. "I love you," she said. It was the first time she had said it in the daylight, the first time the words hadn't been torn from her in a moment of crisis or whispered in the darkness. They hung in the air between them, simple and true. Sam's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable breaking through his usual stoicism. He cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "I love you too," he said, "more than I ever thought I could love anyone again." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Clara melted into him. Outside she could hear the ranch coming to life, the sounds of horses and men, and another day of hard work beginning. But here, in this moment, in this bed, in her husband's arms, none of that mattered. She had found her place in the world, and she was never letting go. The first year of marriage brought challenges Clara hadn't anticipated. Learning to run a ranch household, adapting to the brutal Montana winters, finding her place among the cowboys and cattle, and endless hard work. But it also brought joys beyond anything she had imagined. She learned to ride, really ride, galloping across the prairie with Sam beside her, both of them laughing like children. She learned to bake bread in the ranch's temperamental oven, earning Ezra's grudging approval. She learned to read the weather in the sky and the health of the herd in their movement. She learned, most importantly, that she was capable of far more than anyone had ever believed. Sam surprised her constantly. The quiet, gruff rancher turned out to have hidden depths of tenderness and passion. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie. He read poetry to her by firelight. He held her through nightmares and celebrated her small victories, and loved her with a fierce, protective devotion that still took her breath away. He also never missed an opportunity to remind her how beautiful she was. "You're doing it again," Clara said one morning, catching him staring at her across the breakfast table. "Doing what? Looking at me like that, like what? Like I'm—" She blushed, fumbling for words. Sam rose from his chair and crossed to her, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "Like you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen?" He kissed her softly. "That's because you are, Sam. I'm not." He silenced her with another kiss, longer this time. "You are," he said against her lips. "You were from the first moment I saw you. I just didn't know it yet." Clara smiled, her heart so full it ached. The plain sister, the overlooked daughter, the woman who had never expected to be loved at all. She had found her place, her home, her heart, and she would never let it go. 6 months later, Clara was hanging laundry behind the house when a familiar wave of nausea hit her. She gripped the clothesline, breathing deeply, waiting for it to pass. It had been happening for weeks now. The nausea, the fatigue, the strange cravings and emotional swings. She had been ignoring it, telling herself it was nothing, but deep down she knew. She knew. "Everything all right?" Clara turned to find Sam watching her from the back door. His brow was furrowed with concern, his massive frame filling the doorway. "I'm fine," she said automatically, "just a little tired." He crossed to her, taking the sheet from her hands. "You've been tired a lot lately. And pale. Maybe we should send for the doctor." "No," Clara said quickly. "No doctor." Sam's frown deepened. "Clara, if something's wrong, nothing's wrong." She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "Sam, Nothing is wrong. I need to tell you something. Tell me what? Clara took a deep breath. She had been waiting for the right moment, the perfect moment. But standing here in the sunshine, with his worried blue eyes searching her face, she realized there would never be a better time than now. "I'm pregnant," she said. Sam went completely still, his face drained of color. His hands, which had been resting on her waist, began to tremble. "You're—" He stopped, swallowed. "Say that again." "I'm pregnant." Clara smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Sam. Sometime in the spring, I think." He didn't speak. For a long, terrible moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Clara's heart began to pound. "Sam, are you— Is this not—" He dropped to his knees. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that Clara gasped. Sam pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her, his whole body shaking. She realized he was crying. "Sam." Clara threaded her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling freely. "Sam, my love, please talk to me." "A baby?" His voice was muffled against her dress, raw with emotion. "We're going to have a baby, yes." He looked up at her, and the naked hope in his eyes nearly destroyed her. "After Sarah." He couldn't finish. He shook his head, pressing his cheek against her belly. "I never thought I'd have this again, never thought I deserved it." Clara sank down beside him, taking his face in her hands. "You deserve everything," she whispered fiercely, "everything good in this world. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Sam kissed her, hard and desperate, tasting of salt and joy. When they finally broke apart, he was laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he said again, like he couldn't quite believe it. "A baby," Clara agreed, "our baby." He helped her to her feet, handling her like she was made of glass. Then he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the house. "Sam," she laughed, "I can still walk." "Don't care." He kicked open the back door. "You're growing our child. From now on, I carry you everywhere. That's going to make ranch work very difficult. Don't care about that either." He set her down gently on the sofa, then knelt beside her again, his hand spread across her stomach. "I can't feel anything yet. It's too early." Clara covered his hand with hers. "But soon. A few more months." Sam leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her belly. "Hear that in there?" He murmured against her dress. "I'm your father, and I'm going to love you so much you'll never doubt it. Not for a single day of your life." Clara's heart overflowed. She had never seen him like this, open, vulnerable. Completely undone by joy, she pulled him up to sit beside her, curling into his arms. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't cover it." He kissed her temple, terrified, grateful, amazed. He turned her face toward his. "You've given me everything, Clara. Everything I thought I'd lost forever. You gave it to yourself," she said softly. "The moment you decided to forgive me. The moment you chose to trust again. Best decision I ever made." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her pulse race. "I love you, Clara Hartley, more than I have words for. I love you, too." She kissed him soft and sweet. "Sam Hartley, my husband, my home." They sat together as the afternoon light faded, talking about names and nurseries and all the beautiful possibilities that stretched before them. And Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The lies, the pain, the desperate gamble that had somehow led to this moment. She had come to Montana as someone else, a pretender, a fraud. But she had found herself here in this wild land, in the arms of this complicated, wonderful man. She had found home. The spring thaw was just beginning when Clara felt the first pains. Sam was in the barn when Ezra came running. The old man's face was pale, his composure shattered. "It's time," he said. "Get the doc." Sam had never moved so fast in his life. The next 12 hours were the longest he had ever endured. He paced the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to Clara's cries, unable to do anything but pray. Mrs. Patterson had come from town to help, along with the doctor, but they had banished Sam to the corridor with firm instructions to stay out of the way. He had never felt so helpless, so terrified. What if something went wrong? What if he lost Clara? What if the baby didn't survive? What if he was doomed to lose everyone he loved? Ezra found him slumped against the wall sometime around midnight. The old man sat down beside him, saying nothing, just offering the comfort of his presence. "I can't lose her," Sam whispered. "I can't. You won't." Ezra's voice was steady. "That woman is strong, stronger than you give her credit for." "I give her all the credit." Sam's voice cracked. "She's everything to me, Ezra, everything. Then trust her." Ezra clapped him on the shoulder. "Trust her to fight." As if in answer, a baby's cry suddenly pierced the air, high and thin and absolutely beautiful. Sam was on his feet before he knew he was moving. The bedroom door opened, and Mrs. Patterson appeared, her face wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Hartley." She stepped aside. "Come meet your daughter." Daughter. The words sang through his blood. Sam walked into the room on legs that barely held him, and there was Clara, propped up against the pillows, exhausted and pale and absolutely radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft white cotton. "Sam." Clara's voice was weak but filled with joy. "Come see." He crossed to the bed and looked down at his daughter. She was tiny and red-faced and utterly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and her mother's grey eyes. She blinked up at him, and something in Sam's chest cracked wide open. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks like you." Clara smiled. "Look at that scowl. I don't scowl. You do. But I love you anyway." Sam sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out one trembling finger to stroke his daughter's cheek. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on them. He had never been more terrified, or more in love. "What should we call her?" Clara asked. Sam thought for a moment. Then, "Grace." Clara looked at him, surprised. "Grace? After my mother." Sam's voice was rough. "She died when I was 12. Never got to meet Sarah. Would have loved you, though." He smiled down at the baby. "Would have loved this little one." "Grace Hartley." Clara tested the name. "It's perfect. She's perfect." Sam leaned down and pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead, then to his wife's lips. "You're both perfect. We're a family," Clara whispered. "A real family." "Always were," Sam said. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach." She laughed, tired but happy. "Even when I was lying to you." "Even then." He settled beside her, wrapping his arm around them both. "Something in my heart recognized you, Clara. Recognized that you were mine. The rest was just details." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, their daughter cradled between them. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and star-filled, full of promise and possibility. She had come here with nothing but lies and desperate hope. She had found truth, love, home, and she would never, ever let it go. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their ranch house and watched her family. Sam was in the yard, Grace balanced on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something. At 4 years old, Grace was a fearless little thing, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She adored Sam with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion of childhood, and he worshipped her in return. Nearby, 2-year-old Thomas Jr., named after Clara's brother, was trying to catch a chicken. He had inherited Sam's size and Clara's determination, a combination that kept everyone on their toes. And in Clara's arms, baby Sarah was just beginning to stir from her afternoon nap. Named for the woman Sam had lost, she was a peaceful, sweet-tempered infant who had somehow completed their family perfectly. Clara still couldn't believe this was her life. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been 5 years ago, plain Clara Winslow, the invisible daughter, the desperate sister who had agreed to a terrible deception because she couldn't see any other way. That woman felt like a stranger now. A letter had arrived last month from Boston. Rosalind was married to her banker's son and thoroughly miserable, according to their brother Thomas, who had finished school and was making his own way in the world. Mother had never recovered from the scandal of Clara's deception, though the promised social ruin had never quite materialized. It seemed that no one in Boston particularly cared what happened in faraway Montana. Clara had written back, brief and cordial, with no mention of the past. She had forgiven them all, not because they deserved it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting, and she had far better things to do with her energy, like raise her children, run her household. Love her husband, penny for your thoughts? Clara looked up to find Sam climbing the porch steps, Grace still perched on his shoulders. His hair was more silver now than dark, and new lines had appeared around his eyes, but he was still the most beautiful man she had ever seen. "Just counting my blessings," she said. He set Grace down and crossed to Clara, wrapping his arm around her waist. "That's a long list." "It is." She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I was thinking about how different things could have been if I had told you the truth that first day, if you hadn't forgiven me, if Rosalind had actually gotten on that stagecoach." Sam's arm tightened around her. "None of that matters. All that matters is that you're here. We're here, together. Forever," Clara agreed. He kissed her, soft and sweet, and she felt the same spark she had felt that very first time. The same certainty, the same homecoming. Grace tugged at Clara's skirt. "Mama, can I hold the baby?" Clara smiled and carefully transferred Sarah into her daughter's arms, showing her how to support the head. Grace gazed down at her sister with solemn fascination. "She's so small. You were that small once." Sam crouched beside her. "Hard to believe, I know. Was I a good baby?" "The best." Sam kissed her forehead. "Just like you're a good big sister." Grace beamed. "I'm going to teach her everything. How to ride, how to find eggs, how to make Ezra laugh." "That last one might take some doing," Clara murmured. Sam caught her eye and grinned. His smiles came easily now, after 5 years of happiness, after 5 years of being loved. Clara had done that, plain, practical Clara, who had never expected to be anything special. She had cracked open this man's hardened heart and filled it with light. She was proud of that. More proud than anything else in her life. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Thomas Jr. had given up on the chicken and was now attempting to climb a fence post. Grace was singing softly to baby Sarah. And Sam was looking at Clara with those impossibly blue eyes, full of love and gratitude and quiet joy. "Happy?" he asked. Clara thought about the question, about everything she had lost and found and built, about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. "Beyond measure," she said. He pulled her close, and they stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by their children, watching the day end over their little piece of Montana. It wasn't the life Clara had planned. It wasn't the life anyone had expected for her. But it was hers. Truly, completely, wonderfully hers. And she wouldn't change a single moment. Years later, when people asked Clara Hartley how she had ended up in Montana, she would smile and say it was fate. She never mentioned the deception that had brought her there, never spoke of the lies or the desperate bargain or the terrible moment when everything had almost fallen apart. Some stories, she had learned, were better left untold. But when she looked at her husband, still strong and steady after decades together, she would remember. She would remember the terrified girl on the stagecoach, clutching letters that weren't hers. She would remember the cold fury in Sam's eyes when he learned the truth. She would remember standing in the dusty street, watching his wagon disappear, certain she had lost everything, and she would remember choosing to fight for him anyway. That choice had made all the difference, because love wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never making mistakes or never causing pain. It was about showing up day after day and choosing each other despite everything. Clara and Sam had chosen each other through deception and forgiveness, through loss and joy, through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life. They had chosen each other, and they would keep choosing each other until the very end. That was their story, their truth, their happily ever after, and Clara wouldn't have it any other way. On Clara's 70th birthday, her grandchildren gathered around her chair and begged for a story. "Tell us how you met Grandpa," the oldest one demanded, "the real story." Clara looked at Sam, sitting across from her in his favorite chair. He was 80 now, his hair fully silver, his body slowed by age. But his eyes were still that impossible blue, and they still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He winked at her. Clara smiled and began to speak. Once upon a time, she said, there was a girl who thought she was invisible. A girl who believed she would never be loved, never be wanted, never be anything special. She lived in the shadow of her beautiful sister, and she had accepted that shadow as her home. But then one day, that girl did something brave, something foolish, something that would change her life forever. She got on a stagecoach and traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. The children leaned forward, captivated. The adults exchanged knowing glances. "Was it love at first sight?" one of the grandchildren asked. Clara laughed. "No, not even close. It was complicated and messy and painful. There were lies and tears and a terrible misunderstanding that almost destroyed everything. But then, Clara said softly, they chose each other, despite everything. Because of everything, they chose to trust, to forgive, to build something beautiful out of the broken pieces." She reached across the space between them and took Sam's weathered hand. "And they lived happily ever after." "Grandpa," one of the children said skeptically, "is that really how it happened?" Sam smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made Clara's heart flutter after 50 years. "Every word," he said. "Your grandmother saved my life. She just doesn't like to admit it." Clara squeezed his hand. "We saved each other." The grandchildren erupted into questions and demands for more details, but Clara barely heard them. She was looking at Sam, remembering. The stagecoach. The porch. The moment he had forgiven her. The moment she had known, with absolute certainty, that she would love this man for the rest of her life. She had come to Montana as someone else, a pretender, a fraud. But she had become herself here. In this wild land, with this wonderful man, surrounded by children and grandchildren and more love than she had ever dreamed possible. The plain sister, the overlooked daughter, the woman who had never expected to be anything at all. She had become everything. And that, Clara thought as she smiled at her family, was the greatest story ever told. Their story, her story. The story of a woman who had traveled 1,000 miles to find herself and discovered that home had been waiting for her all along.